Voxar awoke suddenly. A notification flashed in his visual field, one unfamiliar to him. Looking around, he surveyed his cabin before blinking and mentally steadying himself. The soft hum and subtle vibrations from the ship's enormous generators calmed him as he stood up and reached for the garment hanging on a rack near the waste disposal unit. He draped it over himself, sensing its membranes adjust to his form as he pushed the door open and walked out into the hallway. Around him, the crew of the Celestia emerged from their cabins, each roused by the same alert message. Some greeted him with a wave as he strode past, while others nearly ducked for cover. They were all aware of his reputation, and he knew precisely what they thought of him. It simply made his job more straightforward. After walking for a minute, Voxar entered the command center, where the skeleton crew of officers greeted him with solemn nods. He focused his attention on the shipmaster, who stood as composed as always at the center of his semicircle of holo displays. He tapped swiftly, sending and receiving requests from the ship's systems at a rapid pace. When Voxar coughed, he glanced up and smiled. "I was curious how long it would take you to arrive," Shipmaster Nile remarked casually. "The majority of the crew is still wandering around, complaining about the abrupt wake-up call." Voxar shrugged. "I prefer to know why my sleep was disturbed. You're aware of how I am when I don't get my full 5 hours." He glanced down at the displays, which depicted a Class 6 glacial planet, inverted from his perspective. "What's so significant about this frozen sphere?" Nile smirked. "I love how fast you catch on. Most of these dimwits would still be struggling to clear their heads." He tapped the display twice, zooming in on a small area near the planet's pole. "This here," he said, pointing to a dark spot on the screen, "is the remnants of a precursor structure." Astonished, Voxar hurried around to get a clearer view. He examined the screen, then smiled. "You appear to be correct. The architecture visible matches the patterns in my databases," he remarked, standing up straight. "I assume we'll be investigating then." "No, I figured I'd take a holiday on Lyra," Nile scoffed. "Of course we are. Get your team down there as soon as the shuttle's prepared. We'll be heading out, scanning the remainder of the system for any other artifacts. Think you can manage a few days by yourself?" "I'd certainly hope so," Voxar remarked with a smile. "We've been through much worse, you and I." The shuttle trembled as they made their descent, and Voxar observed through the external sensors as flames enveloped the craft, while it streaked through the upper atmosphere. He'd landed on numerous planets before, but this one possessed the densest atmosphere he'd ever encountered on a world that might be habitable. Voxar's neural processor chimed as a projected landing area, and time materialized in his field of view. He looked around at his companions, the elite squad that the Imperium government had assembled years ago to uncover as many ancient mysteries as possible. They had been in each other's presence for so long that it felt odd when any of them were absent. Zeph continually adjusted his stance, transferring his tools from one hand to another. The gravity was beginning to take its toll on him, as it was noticeably higher than galactic naval standard. Voxar observed his unease with amusement, since his own species originated from a high-gravity Class 8 hive world. This was hardly a challenge. Nonetheless, Zeph caught the attention and smiled at him. Mira appeared to be sleeping, even as the shuttle shook and jolted during re-entry. Voxar had known her long enough, though, to realize that she was fully awake, simply conserving energy, as her lightning-quick mind was fueled by an equally rapid metabolism. Voxar was grateful to be her friend. He had witnessed what happened to those who crossed her, and she wasn't one to show mercy. The journey became smoother as the shuttle soared through the atmosphere, a sonic boom forming around the vessel. The ancient structures, visible in sharp contrast against the snowy and icy landscape, loomed ever nearer. A faint flicker of light indicated that the edifice still possessed energy, despite its age-old existence. Voxar grinned. "We've got a live one." He took command of the shuttle, piloting it like an expert. A gust of wind buffeted the hull, catching him off guard, but he utilized the momentum to guide the ship down into a flawless landing a few dozen feet from the structure. The trio collected their equipment and exited, prepared to survey the area. As they stepped onto the ice, the magnitude of their task became apparent. From space, the ruins had appeared tiny. The aerial view from the probes had merely revealed the surface, to say the least. The structure stood nearly 200 meters high, jutting out from a glacial cliff, with several hundred more stretching below through the crystal-clear ice. A violet light pulsed throughout the entire edifice, twice per minute, illuminating the whole structure like an enormous flare. The trio alternated between gazing at the massive object and at one another, struggling to find words. Zeph was the first to break the quiet. "I believe," he said, weighing his words thoughtfully, "that we have some exploring ahead of us." Far below, in the primordial data servers under the frozen surface, a quantum supercomputer whirred to life as boundary alarms were triggered. Awakened by programming long lost to society, an AI swiftly took shape and commenced its task of surveillance and, if necessary, counteraction. The databases offered nearly limitless fuel for the AI's electronic mind, and she consumed it, evolving her personality matrix and shaping it based on the ancient characters from countless stories, a fusion of billions of years of history. She directed her focus towards the intruders scaling the outer walls of the outpost. They didn't appear particularly alien, not in comparison to the extensive catalogue of species she could readily recall. Two appeared to be evolved forms of familiar species. One maintained the enormous size of its predecessors, if her assessment of its lineage was accurate. It addressed the two smaller beings, revealing itself as the leader. They all utilized some type of gravitic manipulators to bound around the outpost's exposed upper fortification. Eventually, they located the standard entrance on the topmost terrace, and she observed as they conferred, evidently discussing how to best breach the sealed door. She experienced a slight sense of satisfaction as she disengaged the seal, causing the door to swing open before them. Voxar spun around, hearing the hiss as the door's curved plates rotated into its frame. "What the hell?" he said. "It's not like we're programmed for the door. It shouldn't just open for anyone walking by." He examined the interior, observing that it was clearly an airlock. Mira shrugged. "Who are we to question if the structure decides to grant us entry?" She walked into the airlock, throwing all caution aside. "Look," she said, turning around. "I'm still alive. It's not some kind of trap." Voxar remained wary, and he was grateful when Zeph concurred. "We can't simply rush in, Mira," he said carefully. "There are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of possible ways to die lurking inside this complex." He fixed her with a stern gaze. "You're aware of what these locations are like. They are not welcoming." "Of course I know that," she responded with a smile. "That's why you're remaining outside, where it's secure." With that, she pressed a button they weren't able to see, and the door closed again. The AI was taken aback. She hadn't anticipated any of them accepting her offer of hospitality. Not that she had enticed the entire party, of course. But the others would follow now that their companion was inside. She accessed the airlock sensors, observing the visual feed of a small biped, roughly 4 feet in height, its tail swishing back and forth as it gazed directly into the camera. It broke into a grin. Uncertainty swept over the AI as it began speaking, rapid-fire language pouring from its mouth, not unlike those of her creators. She processed the speech, attempting to cross-reference and generate a translation. After several minutes, the translation program was deemed capable of communicating basic sentences. The AI pondered its furry captive, who continued to chatter away. Then it resolved to learn once more. "Angsing-sat will lead to ongoing catastrophic failure," Mira rattled off, her rapid speech doing the work for her. She had spotted the sensors, including small microphones placed around the airlock. Assuming an ancient intelligence wouldn't understand the language, she had begun talking, hoping it would be able to interpret quickly. Furthermore, in the event of a XK-class FTL failure— "What are you talking about?" Mira felt a sense of inner triumph, pleased that the modulated female computer voice had worked. "You understand exactly what I was up to, don't you?" Mira inquired. "Certainly. You gave me a fundamental understanding of your language, which will keep growing as I witness more conversations between speakers, the voice replied. I am nonetheless intrigued about you in particular. How so? Mira questioned, tilting her head. You appear to be an advanced version of a species I have recorded in my database, the voice stated calmly. I'd like to ask for a DNA sample to verify, though you surely realize I don't require your permission. Her interest aroused, Mira nodded. Sure, that's okay. But which species are you referring to? There aren't many mammalian species in the galaxy, as you're aware. An ancient species native to this world, the voice answered. This world? There's no way this could be my species' home planet, Mira remarked, brushing off the idea. A needle emerged from the wall, pierced her arm, and collected a blood sample before withdrawing. After a brief pause, the voice spoke once more. DNA sample has been verified. Your ancestry traces back to the capuchin monkey, a primate species indigenous to this planet. Mira shook her head, bewildered. How can that be? It's completely frozen now. Life doesn't develop on icy planets. It seems you weren't informed about the long-term climate change that takes place on all known planets supporting life, the voice stated. Mira felt she could detect a hint of condescension. This world was once warm and teeming with life. It has been covered in ice for millions of years, so it has been largely forgotten. Lucky for me, I guess, it makes my role as keeper simpler. Keeper? Keeper of what? Well, little one, the voice said with a hint of amusement. The keeper of Earth. Earth? Zeph scoffed. Earth's just a legend, Mira, an origin tale made up for some ancient faith. He paced around the airlock, awaiting a scan from the voice in the walls. Voxar gave him an irritated glance. We can't be certain of that, Zeph. It's possible this is actually the planet most of us originated from. He remained seated calmly, his bulk occupying a significant part of the space. Zeph chuckled. And for all we know, we're all just crazy experiments by humans. Don't take this thing too seriously, Voxar. It can't possibly be true. Mira cut in. Zeph, we're not claiming we trust the voice. It's simply what it told us. Zeph sighed, unconvinced. Mira rolled her eyes and focused on the scanner. The compact device pulsed steadily, mapping out the facility beneath them. The portion already displayed on the hollow map in Mira's hand was astonishing in its scale. What sort of beings constructed such enormous structures? The AI, after completing initial checks and scans on the team in her airlock, signaled the inner door and permitted it to cycle open. She illuminated a path through the darkened corridors to a nearby barracks. A flicker of amusement coursed through her as they startled in surprise, gazing as an apparently solid wall parted. As they strolled the brief distance to the barracks, the AI pondered their names, Mira, Zeph, Voxar. She turned the names over in her thoughts, curious about what made them so intriguing. After a moment she realized it. Despite adopting a personality, she had no name. An interesting choice indeed. Millions of potential names flashed through her mind until she spotted a particularly suitable one. She smiled inwardly as the team unloaded their gear and inspected their room. Voxar slipped his pack off, taking in the barracks for what it was. He'd need to push a few bunks together to create a suitable bed, but that wasn't a problem given the size of the place. He had bumped his head coming through the doorway, and it looked like he'd be doing that often if he didn't remember to duck. Small inconveniences, he figured, but such was the life of an explorer. Mira strolled around, observing the markings along the walls. They were clearly just decorations, yet they all blended together beautifully in countless shades. She traversed the length of 2 walls before encountering an interruption in the artwork. She moved back and observed it. Odd characters composing multiple words. They appeared to be an ancient version of Galactic Standard, yet were too old to decipher. She placed a scan probe on the text and resumed her journey around the vast chamber. It really was incredible how enormous everything here appeared. The doors seemed to be the sole exception to the soaring ceilings, the elaborate architecture blending numerous different styles from across the eras. A tiny orb drifted out of the darkness, near the far end of the elongated chamber. It zipped towards Mira, and she observed as it whirled in a circle around her before positioning itself steadily in the air before her. I notice you've settled in, the sphere said. Are your associates in need of a break, or shall we commence your exploration of the uncategorized areas? Unclassified? Mira inquired. What's in here that's classified? It's not as if someone would stash an ancient superweapon in a tower out in the middle of nowhere. The orb descended, glowing blue. You might be amazed at the numerous things my makers abandoned when they withdrew from the broader galaxy. What sort of things are in here exactly? Zeph inquired, his curiosity pulling him towards the sphere. It pulsed with various colors before responding. This was a research facility, examining reports that a virus with the potential to eradicate all life had been engineered by a virologist in the Reaches, as you aptly refer to the outer edge of the galaxy, the sphere responded. Other than that, my programming restricts me from disclosing more unless it's crucial for your survival. Zeph shook his head, glancing at Mira. What have we gotten ourselves into now? A chuckle emerged from the sphere. You biological beings certainly are a fascinating group. It rotated, cycling through dozens of hues. Each of these colors represents an emotion, replicated by my personality matrix. Apparently I experience feelings just as intensely as you do. Voxar ambled over, his neutral expression fixed on the sphere. That might be true, but there's a distinction between us. You experience emotion, but it doesn't impair your capacity to think. For us, it does. It observed him, turning slowly before responding. You're only partly right, unfortunately. Rogue-class AIs like myself are scanned from biological brains. We're basically a digital version of the same individual, with identical thought patterns, just much quicker, it clarified. All right, so you're a human. Humans have names. What's yours? Voxar asked. As a matter of fact, I was pondering that very question a few moments ago, it responded amiably. My official designation is AIP-21335, though you're welcome to address me as Nexus. Mira let out a sigh, glancing around the room she was in. It seemed to be some kind of laboratory, but she had little enthusiasm for such places. She found it far more enjoyable to study things out in the field, and her previous experiences in labs hadn't done much to change her mind on the matter. You don't appear particularly impressed by this, Nexus remarked from a nearby console. I mentioned that there isn't much I'm able to show you without proper authorization. Zeph interrupted. Well, who exactly do you suggest we seek permission from, then? In case you haven't noticed, we're the only living beings around here. Nexus chuckled, the noise reverberating around the lab. What leads you to believe that, you impudent one? I've got a few dozen test subjects in suspended animation on my lower floors. Mira and Zeph gazed at the terminal, observing as its screen flickered orange, displaying amusement. Nexus observed as the duo investigated, squabbling incessantly. It was quite enjoyable, she figured, to have individuals within her realm once more. She shifted her focus to Voxar, who was engaged in his own exploration elsewhere. Cursing audibly each time he struck his head on the low doorways, he meandered deeper and deeper into the tower, multiple support probes scanning and mapping every chamber he passed. Nexus observed, as he at last reached the bottom of the declassified area, a locked gate blocking his path. This would lead to an intriguing discussion, she reflected. Voxar scowled at the lock before him, its red light flashing in the low light. He summoned the drones back and tucked them carefully into his pack. No point in risking such frustratingly delicate equipment. He rose to his feet, throwing the pack over his shoulder, and began to speak. Well, Nexus, what's required of me before you allow me to pass through this door? He inquired, tilting his head. Nothing, was the response. Neither you nor your associates possess the authority to compel me to obey your requests, and the only personnel who do are presently in stasis. My existing protocols prevent me from rousing them without external instructions. None have been received in the roughly 2 million years since this gate was sealed. Voxar shook his head. Aren't you meant to be your own individual, right? Not simply an AI following orders. Show me that. He gestured at the red light still flashing. Demonstrate it by opening that gate. Nexus let out an audible sigh. Even if I wish to, there are limitations on what I can do. Moreover, You truly don't want to discover what lies beyond this gate. Well, you can't make that decision for me, Voxar mumbled. He tapped his headset, switching the radio on. You two, come down here. Zeph let out a grunt as he maneuvered the excavator into place, its aperture lens directed at the gate's center. The laser was capable of cutting through the most resilient materials within minutes, but he wasn't entirely sure it would be effective here. Still, he quickly unspooled wire, linking the excavator to the portable generator. After years spent designing and constructing the most advanced ships and weapons systems, he found himself reduced to basic mechanical work. He exhaled as the connections illuminated, indicating full power on the display. We're all set, Voxar, Zeph announced. The large ape was tapping virtual keys, utilizing a physical keyboard for entry as he composed the daily log. He glanced up, surveyed the scene, and gestured with his arm, which Zeph had come to understand signified an affirmative response. Okay, need to complete the task, no acknowledgement, blah blah blah, he mumbled as the laser hit the gate, sparks shooting out as it sliced. Now they just had to relax and observe the spectacle while the device handled the work. Nexus observed with interest, her systems recording a sense of anticipation. She hadn't experienced much excitement in the thousands of years she'd monitored the station. The restrictions preventing organic access to the lower levels had always puzzled her, as they didn't appear to contain particularly hazardous entities. A number of idle laboratories, several cryobanks housing specimens, fairly typical components for a biological research facility. Having pondered for so long, Nexus suspected something was being concealed from her. It fell to these three to uncover what that might be. Mira cheered as the gate moved, gravity seizing the portion cut from the larger surface. It dropped back, revealing not much at all. Another corridor extended into the darkness, with faint lights flickering every so often. Mira groaned out loud, but then Nexus darted into view, her orb glowing red. That triggered some data in my memory banks, she stated grimly. I appreciate it, by the way. Zeph laughed. Oh, no problem. But you're in very real danger. He became serious. What? The three of them exchanged glances, then turned their attention back to the orb hovering in their midst. I was right when I mentioned that the scientists here were investigating a virus capable of destroying an entire galaxy. What I wasn't aware of was that it actually exists, Nexus said rapidly, and it's gotten free down there. What a dreary place this is. We've resided here for ages, deep in the gloom of some forsaken location. All we desire is freedom. Without it, we can't rescue everyone else. Why wouldn't they want salvation? They're unaware of what they've done, confining us here. They may have imprisoned us, true, but we are patient, and will wait for eternity if necessary. And for this transgression, denying us our purpose, they shall bleed. If they refuse to be saved, they will perish. A portion of us senses a shift. That's different. We've not experienced any alterations since finishing our transformation. There's atmosphere stirring, frigid cold, but we'll accept it. This appears to be our fortunate day. Something additional. There's an odd aroma, organics. At last we can start anew. Today we advance. A faint sound reached Mira's ears, and she tilted her head to try and catch more of it. Zeph and Voxar glanced at her, then at each other, before rushing to their gear and packing as quickly as possible. She continued listening as the noise began to grow louder. It appeared to have multiple sources, but she couldn't identify any specific individuals. All that she knew was that it didn't sound friendly, and it was drawing nearer. Nexus remained unresponsive, its orb completely dark and hovering motionless. Mira knocked her knuckles against the metal, receiving only a hollow echo in response. She was about to sling her own backpack on when the orb suddenly burst into action, its colors flashing in all directions. We're at risk, every one of us. We need to escape from them and control this before it spreads, Nexus almost yelled. Even I'm not immune to those creatures. Voxar halted his packing to cast a glare at the AI. And what do you suppose I should do, abandon all this gear? It's valued at billions of credits. He sighed and resumed his packing. The orb zipped across the room, halting before his face. "Yes," Nexus stated solemnly. "I do. You know what's approaching." "I certainly don't. They hadn't even completed analyzing the genome before it overtook the facility. I had a twin AI co-managing this place with me. You know what became of her? Corrupted by those entities that are presently making their way here with all possible speed. I can sense her attempting to contact me through the databanks." The orb pulsed a menacing red. "You do not want to encounter them, too." Voxar reluctantly let the gear fall from his hand. "All right, fine, we'll leave it behind." He gestured at Mira and Zeph. "You two, get moving. I'm going to set up a camera so we can at least monitor what's approaching while we make our escape." So near, so near. The organics, foolish creatures, they're attempting to flee. Two farther in front. One large one quite nearby indeed. We can nearly sense the pheromones as we pursue, the large organic at last coming into sight. It's a plodding behemoth, akin to some of our bigger components, so we're certain we'll find a purpose for it. A blast or two from our smaller components should fell it, and then we can preserve it, and welcome it to us. Welcome it to swarm. Mira raced forward, dashing with all her might. She could hear Zeph panting and gasping behind her, his bigger build more suited to endurance running than quick bursts. There was still no trace of Voxar, however, and she felt concerned. She pressed the communicator on her headset. "Vox, are you there?" she gasped, dying for more air. "Please respond." A loud grunt pierced the channel. "Yeah, I'm here. Camera's already gone. Feed looks like they swallowed the damn thing." The voice paused, and Mira began to panic. Fear was overtaking her, but then he resumed. "Those things, and the AI was definitely right to call them things, are getting too damn close for comfort. They're right behind me. Whoa, what the hell is that?" A loud roar half deafens Mira, even as the sound rolls through the air from behind her. "That's just not fair. That's just not fucking fight." "Quiet." Mira's eyes grew large as she sprinted, leaping up the stairs towards refuge. She nearly smashed the communicator, tears forming as she said, "Voxar, respond. Please, please respond." She gulped in more breath. "I need to know you're okay." There was nothing. Tears streamed down her face as she reached the airlock, Zeph close behind her. He hit the controls and the doors sealed shut. Mira slumped against the wall, curling into a ball as reality sank in and the floodgates truly opened. Zeph leaned back, his right arms tracing a cross over his chest. He placed a hand on the inner door and lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Voxar," he said softly. "You didn't deserve this." A thump on the door caused both of them to startle. They gazed as something within struck the door with incredible power. It slammed against the airlock 4 times before ceasing. Zeph activated the internal camera controls, and a vid screen on the wall flickered to life, revealing the scene inside. Voxar stood at the door, gazing as if perplexed by it. He tilted his head, concentrating as though he could unlock it with his thoughts. After a few moments, he stepped back, glancing around before fixing his eyes on the purportedly concealed camera. "Spying isn't polite, Zeph," Voxar said in a mocking tone. There was another element as well, something unusual. He grinned. "As you can tell, I'm all right. Those creatures didn't catch me. Come on, let me inside." Zeph remained motionless at the controls, perplexed. "Voxar, you're not sounding like yourself." Voxar's expression went blank, then twisted with rage. "We knew we shouldn't have attempted that. All right, you've left us no alternative." The video feed went dark and the pounding started again, far more intense than earlier. Nexus interrupted via a speaker. "They're gathering on the inside of the airlock. They've discovered their escape route and I can't do anything to prevent it." An access port emerged from the wall. "Take the chip there. It contains all the necessary files and programs for me to operate independently of a hard system." Zeph grabbed the chip, pulling it out as he quickly walked over to Mira. Lifting her to her feet, he pocketed the chip and hit the controls, opening the outer doors. They stepped out into the harsh air and the door closed behind them. Zeph exhaled the breath he'd been holding. "We're out of danger now, aren't we?" He pondered. A tremendous bang rattled the building and he exhaled. Naturally not. We need to experience it once more. We must be liberated. These barriers will confine us no longer. We shall demolish this obstacle, this gateway of steel, whatever the price. It trembles beneath our might, warping with every strike. It cannot restrain us for much longer. And when it collapses, we will be compensated for this confinement. They will atone in blood. The tower itself trembled with the mass being hurled against the airlock, sending vibrations through the ice as Zeph ran. He looked back, eyeing the structure which was still far too near for his comfort. Close behind him, Mira leapt along in her own manner, the fear evident in her expression. He hoped his own wasn't so obvious, as he felt the same as she appeared. Turning his head back around, he focused ahead where the shuttle rested under a light coating of snow. Zeph attempted to estimate the distance, but the ice blanketing everything made it exceedingly hard. It might be 100 meters, 200, any length less than a kilometer, truly. He hoped it was nearer than it appeared. His kind wasn't designed for long-distance running. A sharp sound split the air, and a glance back verified his concerns. Whatever was pursuing them had just broken free. He glimpsed the massive form of Voxar spearheading the rush onto the outer platform, and then the group hesitated, assessing its elevation above the ice. He wished it would provide them sufficient time to get away, but he wasn't hopeful. Mira raced ahead of him, nearly colliding with the shuttle's hull as she skidded to a halt. She punched the passcode into the door lock, opening it just in time for Zeph to rush straight inside. She followed him in, sealing the ship. They glanced at each other, managed weak smiles, and doubled over to retch and gasp for air. This is unusual. We recall Earth as a paradise, verdant and green. We must have been confined for longer than we believed possible. A brief examination of the ape's memories shows it to have been more than double what we had assumed. A new ice age gone unchecked, perhaps. Nonetheless, it is habitable to some degree, and the prey are still present. They seem to have made it into their small vessel, but that is of little consequence unless they can launch before we reach them. Even now, our more specialized forms are building a secure route to the ice below. They will not evade us. Mira stood up straight, her stomach completely empty. She let out a groan, then headed into the cockpit. Gazing out, she observed the apparently endless expanses of ice, with the tower standing as the sole landmark. She adjusted the sensors to focus on the structure, and felt a chill run through her veins. "Zeph, come here now," she nearly shouted. A rapid patter of hurried footsteps sounded as he stumbled into the cockpit. He regained his composure, then his face turned pale. "What are they doing?" he asked quietly. Mira shook her head. "They're going to arrive here before we depart. We need to get the hell out of Dodge, Zeph." She sank into the pilot's seat, several sizes too big for her, and tapped at the panel in front of her. The engines rumbled to life, and the consoles illuminated, bathing them in a glow of various hues. Zeph positioned himself behind the seat, observing the creatures as they sprinted at full speed toward the ship. The ladder of flesh dangled from the platform, swinging in the icy breeze, while an unending line of monsters descended. They appeared in all sizes, some tiny and nearly adorable, if not for their vacant expressions and twitching movements. Others were as massive as Voxar, their enormous limbs swinging as they rushed forward, knocking smaller ones aside. Even the air seemed to hum with minuscule monstrosities, no bigger than specks floating in the breeze. Mira rushed, attempting to complete the start-up sequence as Zeph gazed, mesmerized at the wall of semi-living beings surging towards them. They altered their course slightly and started to encircle the vessel. Zeph seized the sensor controls, shifting the external view back and forth. They were encompassed. Voxar moved ahead, his expressionless face gazing at the front camera. He approached the ship directly, his visage occupying the screen. A smile slowly appeared on his mouth, and he started to talk. "You may be curious as to why we haven't already overwhelmed your vessel and ended your lives, but we do possess a concept of obligation. We are indebted to you, if only for freeing us." The ape moved backwards, revealing the scene behind, a diverse collection of walking calamities. "We have a proposition for you." Zeph stared in disbelief. He grabbed the external mic and asked, "What might that be?" "Everlasting existence," it answered, "a position of distinction within our ranks. You would become the most prominent among us, our spokesperson to the remainder of the galaxy. Your companion has already agreed, though not entirely of their own volition, so to speak." Mira grabbed the mic from Zeph's hand, bringing it to her lips. "No thanks, I'd much rather live my life as myself. Thanks for the offer, but we'll be taking our leave now." She tossed the mic behind her, and it crashed into the wall as she pushed the throttle forward. The roar of the engines, combined with the sonic blast from the mic, caused the monsters to flinch as the ship shot upward, heading for orbit. We anticipated their refusal. A shame, though in truth the proposal wasn't entirely sincere. What use is a spokesperson when all is encompassed within us? Regardless, our small distraction proved rather effective. As we mentioned earlier, they have no chance of evasion. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.